Welcome back to The Shepherd's Pie, a slice of faith for our messy lives. I'm Tony Kolenc, a professor at Ave Maria School of Law, father of 5 grown children, and the author of inspirational fiction for both adults and teens. And on that note, I hope your middle grade readers, especially those in the 3rd to the 6th grade, will enjoy my latest release from our Sunday Visitor. It's called Penny and the Stolen Chalice. It's a full modern mystery that takes place at a Catholic school with a 6th grade girl as the protagonist. So it's a lot of fun. Check it out, Penny and the Stolen Chalice. But today we're speaking with another one of my co-authors at CatholicTeenBooks.com, and that is Amanda Lauer, about the latest in her Heaven Intended series, A Faith Such as Heaven Intended. My guest today is Amanda Lauer, an award-winning author of fiction for teens and young adults, and a fellow member of CatholicTeenBooks.com. She's done a lot of things in her life, including acting and modeling, and publishing more than 1,500 articles in newspapers and magazines. And she has been on a roll with her latest series of books in the Heaven Intended teen series, which takes place during the Civil War. And we're going to hear more about her latest novel in that series, A Faith Such as Heaven Intended. She and her husband John have been married for almost 43 years, and they have 4 grown kids and 8 grandchildren. Amanda, welcome back again to The Shepherd's Pie.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate being on again.
So you have been up to a lot of writing, but I want to start off by asking you about another project, and that is one of your books potentially being turned into a movie. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with that?
So there's a Christian movie channel or streaming channel, and they produce their own content, and they also air other people's works. And they have created a contract with me basically for my book, Anything But Groovy. That's a time travel tale set in 1974 about a modern 13-year-old who gets hit in the head playing volleyball and wakes up in her mom's body in 1974 and has to live her mom's 7th grade year. So we kind of call it a cross between Back to the Future and Freaky Friday, the Christian Catholic version. So we are in the process of getting the script written and tagging the actors and actresses we'd like to work with us. But really the main thing we're looking for right now is the funding for the film. That's not the easiest part, let's put it that way. But if somebody hears this and inspired, tell them to reach out to me. You can go to amandalauer.com and connect with me through my website. But we would love to have someone on board as basically the producer, is what they give the title to the person who helps fund this. But there's a lot of streaming services that are also interested in this. So if once we get it off the ground and get production started, I think good things are going to happen with this film. It's a great family-friendly film. And even the book itself, a lot of parents will read it with their kids, or they'll each read it, one after the other. And it brings up a lot of great discussions about what life was like for mom or dad or grandma or grandpa when they were growing up and they were middle schoolers. And the book is basically based on my 7th grade year going to a small Catholic school in northern Wisconsin, and the things that I went through and survived.
That's exciting. I know we have a lot of people who do write books in our circles, and the idea of having one of your books turned into a movie is pretty exciting. Congratulations on that. I hope you get the funding for that. In the meanwhile, you keep writing these books in the Heaven Intended series. You have 5 in there now, and I know you said you're preparing maybe the final one, a book 6.
Yep.
Talk just real quick, what is that series about?
So the Heaven Intended series is a YA series set in the Civil War. And we have the young lady and the young man, and in each book, they're on opposite sides of the war. So the girls are always about 17 years old. The guys might be a year or 2 or 3 older than them. And the books are told in first-person limited perspective or third-person limited perspective. So every other chapter is told from the female's perspective and then the male's perspective. So you're seeing what life was like during the Civil War from the home front and from the battle front. like I mentioned, in each book, they're on opposite sides of war, and they have to rely on their faith to survive the last year of the war. And so each book in the series starts on the same day in May of 1864 and ends a year later in May of 1865. And it follows two young people. And the unique thing is that there's always a connection between the couples. Like the first couple, it was Amara and Nathan. And then the second book features Amara's roommate at a boarding school before the war started and Nathan's business partner, how they meet. Characters keep popping up from previous books and they end up being the hero or the starlet of the next book. It's just been such a joy to do that. The fourth book actually came about because during COVID, I suppose everybody was reading. A gentleman who's a movie producer actually reached out to me. They had been interested in making a movie about a world such as Heaven Intended, but that's quite expensive to make a period piece, especially during a war. So that's been kind of on the back burner. But he suggested that I write another book in the series that featured a woman of color as the person on the front of the book, who the book was about. So there was a young lady from a previous book, book two, A Life Such as Heaven Intended. So I brought her back and she got her own book. And then book five came about. That's the one that just came out in November, A Faith Such as Heaven Intended.
Tell us a little bit about the characters in this latest novel of yours.
So this character from 1864 is based on a character from this day and age and her life. And she's spunky, she's fun, she's spontaneous, she's loving, and she's turned out to be the ideal character. And then for the male character, I base it on a few people I know in my life. Some people may say he's on the spectrum. Some people may say, actually, a friend of ours, Amy Catapan, says he is like, was he based on the character Matthew in The Chosen? And I said, when she said it, I'm like, oh my gosh, subconsciously I was doing that because it really is. So this young man, he's brilliant, kind of a Doogie Howser person. He like started studying medicine at age 14. By 18, he was a surgeon. He was recruited by the Southern Army to be a surgeon for their army. But as smart as he was, his people skills weren't great. And so he meets this young lady. They happen to be in Gettysburg. She was there because her two older brothers had taken the train to Gettysburg, and the only boy in her entire class in this one-room schoolhouse was also on the train. They joined up, they enlisted, and she wasn't going to let them go without her following. So she cuts her hair, grabs a drum that her brother had, and she like sneaks onto the train, goes off to Gettysburg. She had no idea what was in front of her. Of course, they never did either. It turns out to be one of the bloodiest battles in the Civil War. And so all the drummers, regardless, they weren't drumming, they were stretcher bearers. So she became a stretcher bearer for these 3 days and kind of worked her way into the operating theater. And she was just helping and assisting with operations and assisting the surgeons. And she realized that she had a knack for it. She was interested in it. She had a great love for people. And she made up her mind that she was going to be a surgeon. Well, here the other young man, this Benedict, who went by the name Ben, he was a Confederate surgeon. He was there with the army. He was captured, but they did end up using him to help. There was obviously casualties on both sides after the war was done. That's how they initially met. By chance, a year later, when the Gettysburg was all wound down, all the last people that had been taken care of, everybody was gone and sent home or whatever. She was assigned to a hospital in Washington, D.C., where she hoped to get to be an intern to learn surgery. They weren't as excited about that thought. so she was kind of assigned to be a nurse to start. But this young man ends up at a hospital in Washington, D.C., too. And there's a lot of sparks that fly between them when he realizes that she still has this idea of becoming a surgeon.
Tell us about some of the faith elements that impact these characters.
This young man who is just so cut and dried, so technical, not a huggy, lovey kind of feely person like that, but he was very committed to his Catholic faith. It made sense. It made the most sense of any theory of life, and he never wavered from that. This young lady, on the other hand, even though she was born and raised Catholic, her mom had died in childbirth. they had like 7 other children that were shipped off to an older sister's home and to a ranch in Illinois. And she had pretty much given up on God and given up on her faith. And her faith ends up growing by his example, even though he's not your traditional, he wouldn't be a holy roller by any means. And he didn't think he was evangelizing, but he was in his way. And they realized that even though they had a lot of differences, they butted heads a lot. They did have this spark. They had this faith, the Catholic faith, and they decided to put things aside and to concentrate on what they did have in common. And that's how they survived the last year of the Civil War.
When you're bringing the faith element into the story, was there any practical connection between their faith and the decisions that they wind up having to make in the plot?
Yeah, well, for Ruth, who was the young lady, even though her faith was dormant at that time, it was still there. She knew that God had given her a gift, and she could help use it to help all these soldiers who were in just dire need. That helped kind of also make the faith, to flame it back to life, to fan the flame back to life, let's put it that way. And for Benedict, it was a little bit different for him because the faith was just, it was kind of compartmentalized. So his faith was here, his work was here. He didn't necessarily see the connection. But I think when you're in that kind of situation with all the number of patients they saw every day, the hours they put in, it caused that connection to, it caused them to come together for him. And he could see that connection. And he, even though he felt like he was so independent, he could do this, he didn't need anybody's help. He realized that he needed the faith, and he needed Ruth and her faith to boost him up on the lowest days when things were looking so bleak. They were there actually when President Lincoln was assassinated. They had personally met him, and it was just a tragic day for them. And so Benedict was able to get himself attached to the basically the army unit that was tracking down John Wilkes Booth. And even after John Wilkes Booth was fatally injured, basically, or shot, when they captured him, he actually still used his skills to work on him, trying to save his life. And when that was not going to happen, to give him what comfort he could in his dying hours. So it's a really interesting aspect that you don't read a whole lot about in the Civil War. So I did a ton of research, and I integrated a lot of real people, a lot of the people who were the soldiers, all the people involved, even looking up so many things about President Lincoln's wife and the things they did and how they would run into each other in Washington City, as it was called in the day. It was just like really interesting. I learned a lot. I think people are going to learn a lot. But you also watch his faith evolving. And that's probably a lesson for all of us. Our faith isn't just this thing we got at baptism or when we were confirmed. I think instinctively, both our characters, Ruth and Benedict, were trying to they realized the value of being a better version of themselves every day, ultimately with the goal to be in heaven someday.
Was there any inspiration for these faith elements from your own life or people that you've experienced, their stories of how faith interacts with their lives?
Well, for sure. I think when being born and raised Catholic, my dad was Catholic. My mom didn't have any faith practice in the day. So my dad instilled the faith in me and my brothers. But growing through childhood, even into like the first years of our marriage and stuff, it was just something you did. I went to Catholic school, so of course you go to church, you go to confession, you do the things. But I don't know that I was necessarily like living it out on a day-to-day basis. Of course, I was always nice and stuff, but it came to me, and it was probably in the throes of raising 4 kids, ages 6 and under, that I realized like I needed this faith. I needed this rock in my life. And at some point, and I kind of attribute it to, I was in a severe car accident back in 2001, so it's many years ago. But that was such an eye opener. That said, you just never know. Obviously, it could have turned out way worse. And I realized like I have to take my faith seriously, and I need to grow in my faith and try to get better, try to figure this out, learn more about the faith. And also, I want to be that kind of Catholic that people, I want to be so joyful in my faith that people will look at me and go, I don't know what she's doing, but I want to do what she's doing. Whatever she has, I want that too. To have that joy, to be known as the nice person, to be known as, the generous, whatever nice adjectives there are. But I want people to look at me and go, yep, she's not only a Christian, she's a Catholic Christian. I can tell by how she lives her life, how she talks, how she walks her talk.
What's interesting is your character Benedict sounds like he's the one that has the strong faith, and your female character in this case didn't. And it sounds similar to what you described in your own childhood with your parents. Can you talk a little bit to that? Is there something that you're channeling here about having, a father or a male figure with a strong faith and the impact that has on a person?
I never really thought of it that way till you just mentioned it now, but my dad is first generation American. His parents were born in Ireland and England, and he was raised Catholic. It was always a very strong element in his life because he went to not only Catholic grade schools, but a Catholic high school in the Bronx. And so that was always part of his life. And there was no way, even though my mom grew up with really no faith, well, she grew up in the Depression era, and the only time they went to church is they went to a Baptist church once a year on Christmas Eve because they were so poor, and each kid got an orange and some hard candy. So my mom, I remember back in the day, the only time she came to church was on Christmas and Easter with the family when everybody dressed up like they did in the 70s. But my dad, he was there for us all the time. I have two older brothers, and we were all raised in the faith. I just knew I would never ever leave it. But not that I didn't know everything. Obviously, I was confirmed. My brothers were confirmed. We all got that far, and so it was always important to me. And I always hoped that my mom would see what we saw in it. And actually, my parents ended up getting divorced in like late 70s, but before they were divorced, my mom actually did get baptized in the Catholic faith. I think she was probably hoping it would help with that. It didn't, and she is now 86 years old. And about 2 or 3 years ago, we were able to get her confirmed and have her first communion like 3 years ago. So it was really neat. It took many, many years and lots of praying, but I'm so glad she did because no matter what happens from this point out, she's in a good place.
Wow, that is a beautiful story. So, in your book here, In the Faith Such as Heaven Intended, does your Benedict character, is it his faith that somehow is able to influence your female
Really?
protagonist?
I really think so because for one thing, I don't want to give a lot away about the book, but they come to end up being on the same side of the war by chance. Well, once that was established and they were both in the same city, he was like, we are going to mass every Sunday. He insisted that she go to mass, and he's practically dragging her there at first. And something happened when all of a sudden it just like clicked with her, and she stopped dreading it. It was Easter weekend, and they went to the Easter Vigil Mass. And she had never experienced this. This was in a cathedral, Washington, D.C., right? And there was something about that just touched her heart, and she knew this was her home, and she knew that this was her faith, and she was never going to abandon it. And she was mad at God for so many years for taking her mother and her sister and all these things. And she knew that God wasn't a vindictive God. He wasn't mean to them. He wasn't, all these things happened for a reason, and it all started to click. And then things changed for her.
What about your Benedict character, the one who seems to have a faith? You said he starts off working for the Confederacy. And I always wonder about, like people who are, in theory, on the wrong side of history, if you want to call it that, but they are faithful. How do they live, if they feel like maybe they don't believe in the cause? Or I'm curious how your character dealt with the fact that he was, in theory, on the wrong side of the war here.
Right. Well, the people in the South certainly didn't think they were on the wrong side of the war. And he didn't really have a choice about what side to fight on anyhow. He was from Savannah. he had to fight for the South. He didn't even ever think of fighting for the North. However, after he had followed his regiment all through from the South all the way up to Pennsylvania, to Gettysburg, had been working as a surgeon. And even when he was a surgeon, he would have fixed anybody. He would have worked on anybody. He didn't care if they were North, South, black, white. It didn't matter. For him, he loved putting things back together that were broken. And that included a lot of human bodies. And so that just was what he wanted to do with his life, is to fix these things. And so when after he was a prisoner of war, and there was a prisoner of war swap between the North and the South, which happened a lot. And so he was freed, but he was approached by somebody from the North with a proposal for him to actually be a surgeon for the North. And again, he was kind of ambivalent about the whole war per se. I think he didn't like it because it just made more people broken. But when he was given an opportunity to work for the other side, and it was in Washington City, as it was called, and it was an increase in his pay. Basically, he just like put it to paper again. He's very logical. You do the pros and cons, you write it down, and he's like, "Yep, that makes sense. I'm going to go work for that side." And that's kind of how he got over there.
And then just focusing real quick on your female Ruth, I know whenever you are writing for a modern audience, we have different issues maybe that women are thinking about today. Did you have any sort of a women's rights or feminist streak going through your Ruth character?
Well, she wouldn't have labeled it that. She wanted rights for herself. She wanted to do what she wanted to do. She didn't want to do the traditional woman's role of the 1800s. She didn't want to just necessarily be a wife and a homemaker, as lovely as that is. Even though she hoped to have children and a husband someday, she really felt that she could make the difference now at her age, at 17, by studying medicine and doing what she could, because so many soldiers were being shipped up to Washington from all over, all battlefields all over, because they had the brightest and the best surgeons were up there. They weren't the field surgeons, they were the creme de la creme. And she wanted to be in that, and she wanted to contribute. It did irk her. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of funny scenes in this book where she tries to like just bully her way into these offices of these commanding officers and say, "I want to be in this theater. I want to be doing this. I want to be." They thought it was quite comical, but she did prove herself in the end. And that's really what she showed them, that a woman could perform as a surgeon just as well as any man, and perhaps better in some instances, because she had smaller fingers. She could, dig bullets out and shells out of people that other people couldn't get to because just physiologically. So anyhow, so yeah, she had a fight to get her way to where she got, but in the end, it just worked out beautifully for her, and a lot of lives were saved because of her.
What about yourself? How did you grow, or did your faith grow as you were kind of working through writing this book? How did your faith interact with the writing of this fifth
Yeah.
book?
Well, I will say every book I write, I feel like my faith deepens. I do so much research, particularly on the Catholic Church, because I write in eras all the way from the 1500s, the 1600s, the 1800s to modern day. And the church has evolved through all those years, and I love learning about it. I love learning about the lives of saints as well. As I'm striving to make my characters, to give them that great character arc, to make them better people every day, it just reminds me that I need to, in my real life, strive to be a better person every day. And every day, too, I strive to do at least one really nice thing where I have to go out on my way to do it, whether it's, take a friend for coffee or go visit a shut-in or write a nice note to somebody, send an encouraging text to somebody or whatever. Every day I try to look for one of those little things to just leave my mark, to show people this is the joy of being a Catholic, is to spread the joy of our faith and to include everybody and to make other people's lives better because I was here. And obviously I think my legacy it's the books I've written. If it's God's will, it'll be the movies that will be made from these books. But also the legacy is the things people will remember when I'm gone. the nice things I did for them, the notes I sent them, the encouragement I gave them.
Yeah, that's going to be the lasting legacy there. All right, so if folks want to get a hold of the Heaven Intended series, and especially this latest one, A Faith Such as Heaven Intended, where would you like them to go to find these books?
AmandaLauer.com. That would be great, because then you could see the whole series, all the books. My blog posts are on there. You can learn about my crazy, busy, funny life, all the different things. I'm juggling a lot of things right now in my life, and people probably get tired reading my blogs, just hearing what my life's about. But I talk a lot about the writing life, about my faith life, about being a mom, about being a grandma. All that's on there. Plus, there's my upcoming book signings, just all that kind of information people will want to know if they want to stay in touch with me, and people can, correspond with me through the website too. Of course, there's always Amazon too, but that's not as fun. But the books are there, and plus my audiobooks are on Amazon. I have the books in multiple languages: Portuguese, German, Italian, French, Spanish, you name it. It's in a different language. So people, if English isn't their first language and they want to read some of my books, go on Amazon and find them all there too.
Wow, that's really cool. All right, Amanda, it has been wonderful having you back on the show again. I really appreciate you coming back on, and wish you the best of luck with this fifth book. And I know writing that final book will be a lot of fun too, because it's the last one in the series.
True, true.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for the show today. We've been talking with Amanda Lauer about her book, A Faith Such as Heaven Intended. Again, this is Antony Barone Kolenc. If you want to learn more about me or have me come speak to your school or homeschool group, or just learn more about my books, you can check it all out at my website, antonykolenc.com. But until next time, may God bless us as we rely on our faith to work through the messy challenges of our lives.